All right, welcome everybody. It is Dan Tomaszewski here with Everything MSP. Hope you're having an awesome day. And we have our good friend from MSP 360, David Gugic. And did I pronounce it right, David?
I think Gugic works just fine. Depending on who you ask in my family over the last century, you'd probably get a
Yeah,
few different answers. So
yeah,
if I were my dad, I would just use green. He was in
great,
sales growing up and he never had to spell that. Just say like the color. And that's my restaurant name back when we had restaurants that we could go to.
nice,
And
nice.
I will use it again someday. So thanks for
You
having
know,
us.
I've heard every pronunciation that you can imagine with my last name. Gosh, I mean, I've heard ride a jet ski.
Ride a jet ski. I like that.
No idea where that came from, but kind of funny. So, how's the weather where you're at?
You know what? I don't want to jinx it, but I think it's a foregone conclusion that tomorrow, starting in the morning, we are getting a nor'easter. I think it's the same storm that was coming up from New Orleans and Alabama, Mississippi. That was just all rain down there. I think it's turning into snow with a cold front that's coming from Chicago. And so we're saying we could get anywhere from 6 to 12 inches, which I think is about 20 times more than we got all of last winter.
Wow. Yeah. Here it is 29 degrees right now. It is sunny though, which is kind of nice. And we do have snow in the forecast, which, I mean, with Christmas coming up, I personally enjoy having that snow. For our attendees, just go ahead in the chat, put a question in there. We're trying to find out where you're all located.
Oh, yeah. Where am I? You ask. I'm in Wilmington, Delaware, which is, well, if you're on the East Coast somewhere, you probably know. If you're not, I am in the Philadelphia market, about 35 miles south of downtown Philadelphia.
Very cool.
Sandwiched between D.C., Washington, D.C., and New York City.
Okay.
About an hour north of Baltimore.
We have some Canadian friends here that know
Canada.
cold very well. And I'm sure that they may have, some of them may have gotten a decent amount of snow. Oh, we got a West Bloomfield, Michigan, another fellow Michigan fan. I'm over in Grand Rapids area.
And a Michigan graduate right here.
Yes, that's awesome.
Yes.
Gotta root for U of M.
Even though we didn't have a final game this year against Ohio State because of coronavirus.
Right.
Probably better for us. We haven't been competing that well head to head in the last decade or so.
Exactly. So today we are here to talk about a very important topic. We're going to talk about busting common myths about cloud backups for MSPs. And, the myths are ones of which many of our clients have, right? And, these are the type of things that, we want to be able to know how to discuss with clients that might have any kind of objections. And with that being said, David, I'm going to turn it over to you and we'll kick it off.
All right. Thanks, Dan. So we're going to talk about some common myths. These are maybe not all of them are going to be relevant as today as maybe as relevant as they might have been 5 years ago. You probably have busted or confirmed or find them plausible. We're using little myth busters in here. But we're going to go through what I think are the 4 most common ones. And then we'll let you guys vote. I think Dan's going to put up a poll, at least in the Zoom, where you could answer about whether or not you think it's confirmed, busted, or plausible. I'll give you my answer, and we'll also post what's on the poll. If you're on Facebook, I think you'll probably have to type it, if I'm not mistaken, Dan, into the chat for the video. And we'll just kind of collect those results and let everybody know. So feel free to answer. All right. So where's my next button? There it is. Okay. So these are the 4 myths we're going to be testing. The cloud is not secure enough. I used to hear this all the time. I've been with MSP 360 for 3.5 years. And this is probably the top question I would get asked all the time: is our data safe in the cloud? So we'll get to that. Myth 2, cloud performance is not fast enough. We'll talk a lot about that, about how to make it faster and really what is fast enough for you. Cloud management, how are you going to manage all these objects in the cloud? Is that difficult to do? And the last one, and probably the most extensive of the four, is whether or not the cloud is too expensive or the pricing unpredictable. And that's what I mean by unpredictable. So let's start with the first one. The cloud is not secure enough. So I think it used to be an issue of trust for a lot of folks who are considering, and especially MSPs who are considering using the cloud. Do you trust the cloud storage vendor more than you trust yourself? And that was something that maybe needed to be answered. And I think it did need to be answered. Who had the better data security? I think now we probably could say with probably a lot of confidence that if you look at the big companies out there, and by big companies, I mean even like the smaller ones, not just the Amazons, Googles, and Microsofts of the world, but also the smaller cloud vendors like the Wasabi and the Backblazes, that they're far bigger than most MSPs are in terms of the sophistication around their data centers. They have sophisticated security, and they have security personnel protecting the area, and they have great data management and hardware and text monitoring things. So do they have better security than most MSPs would probably have if they were running their own data center, or certainly on-prem storage that an MSP might put at one of their customers, whether that's a NAS or a SAN or some kind of file server to keep data? Is the security around the cloud better or worse? So I'd probably argue it's probably a lot better. These companies have far more to lose because they are storing data for millions of customers. But is data file security a concern, like the concern about the actual data you have up there? Well, there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, most of which will not be news to you as MSPs. First being AES encryption. AES is just an encryption standard that the Department of Defense decided on many years ago. It comes in a few different forms, but a lot of companies like ours use AES 256 to protect the data. That data is encrypted at the source, so at your customer, and it stays encrypted. So it's being stored in the cloud, fully encrypted. That means the cloud storage vendor can't even get at that data. They can see it, but there's not anything they can do with it. What else can you do? Things like file name encryption. If you're worried about personally identifiable information in file names, most of us, if you just look at your music library as maybe an example of how things are named, there's a lot of information about the music that's in a file in the file name. And that could be true for clients of yours. Imagine like a HIPAA compliant customer who's dealing with medical imaging, who's naming their files, David Gugik's MRI of his shoulder, October 5th, 2019. That would be a lot of information you wouldn't want to get out there. So file name encryption can go a long way to protecting that data. That way you can see a file, but you have no idea what its true name is or really what's in it. Things like TLS, SSL encryption. This is just encryption that's applied for any data that's transmitted over the wire. So any data that goes over the internet is wrapped in another layer of encryption. That way, in case anybody's snooping and is able to see the data, there's nothing they can do with it. Now, keep in mind, the data has already been encrypted with AES encryption, so it's fully secure that way. Then we have things like two-factor authentication. This is not so much an encryption, but this is just another method for you as an MSP or your techs who are going online to look at things, to have some assurance that before you get into the system, that to see what data may be stored in the public cloud storage provider, we're providing another level of security around that. The last thing is data at rest. So most cloud storage vendors will either provide in automatic fashion or just even transparently behind the scene what's called at-rest encryption. That means when the data is stored on disk, it's wrapped up in another layer of encryption. And this is mostly designed to keep the data safe should somebody actually break into the data center and rip a hard drive out of a cabinet and take it home. So there's a layer of at-rest encryption. Underneath that, there might be file name encryption. Underneath that is AES encryption. So that data is pretty secure. When you're talking about data durability, this is another term that cloud storage vendors throw out a lot. Data durability is really what's the likelihood that the data is going to be destroyed. You can think of a pretty common example of a single drive NAS, so the hard drive dies, right? All of a sudden it's making that horrible clicking noise and the drive is gone. The data is gone, most likely. Now, if you're doing it right, you probably have a RAID 1 or a RAID 5 array, maybe even RAID 6 for more redundancy in there. The point being that most cloud storage vendors measure their data durability in the number of nines. It wouldn't be uncommon to see 99 point, you can see it on the screen right there. There's a lot of nines there. I don't know how many nines, might be 11 nines of durability. That means statistically, you are not going to lose that data. It's very, very unlikely. And also the cloud naturally provides better protection than local storage against malware and things like ransomware. Why is that? Well, while it's not truly air gapped, like a hard drive you might take home at night, or tape backup systems where the tapes are removed and shipped offsite for storage. It is another layer of APIs and security that would be required for some type of malware to get at the backups in the cloud. So it's not just scanning files over a network. It would need to infiltrate the backup services. That's why things like locking down agents, which can be done with our software, but and most software out there can go a long way to making sure that any malware that gets on can't even see the cloud data. So that's my kind of riff on cloud security. Oops, let me get back over to my presentation. So I think voting's already started. So the cloud is not secure enough. Busted, confirmed, plausible. I see people are voting all across the board. I don't know, Dan, if you can see what's going on Facebook, but from the Zoom side, and I assume everybody can see this, 92% of the folks have voted busted. Now, a few of you have voted confirm that it's not secure enough. If you really truly believe it's not secure enough and you want to share why, please drop it in the chat and let us know what your concerns are. I would certainly be interested in knowing. From my own perspective, I think it's busted. I think the cloud is secure enough. I think the questions that were asked and maybe still are asked are important. And I think most of them have been answered. So I think it's secure. That's not to say, we'll talk a little bit about whether or not you should be doing local backups. And most customers out there will do some sort of local backup with their cloud backup, so you can have data in both places. Dan, I don't know, is there anything you can share from the Facebook side?
No, there's no additional polling. If anybody is on Facebook and you want to say whether the myth one, the cloud is not secure enough, is either confirmed, busted, or plausible, please go ahead and enter that in. Okay. Looks like 92% are saying busted right now from our Zoom poll. All and tell you, it's you brought up a good point of file naming, something that you don't really think about with PII. And how easy it is for someone to want to make it, more easily identifiable, right? But just in a file name, and so just things like that that you have to look out and pay attention to.
Yeah. So there's some comments in the chat. Somebody writes, I believe cloud backups are secure, but users are not secure. That will always be the case, as the user is always going to be the weakest link as it comes to any security related argument. That's true. One thing you can do with most software is lock out the agents. So the backups are happening in the background, independent of any interaction or possible interaction from the end users. Now that won't stop an end user from deleting data locally, either accidentally or maliciously, let's say, disgruntled employee who's being laid off deletes data, but most backup software can prevent the deletion of the backup data or delay it for some amount of time. That way, should somebody delete something locally, you'll still have backup. So I agree. Users are the weakest link, especially when it comes to things like ransomware and these types of phishing attacks, the social engineering that goes on to get access to the system. So that's a good comment. So let's talk a little bit about whether or not about cloud performance. Certainly a more complex topic, and maybe I won't be getting too complex in my discussion of it. And there's probably a lot of comments that you may have about it. But generally speaking, upstream bandwidth tends to be the limiting factor in terms of how fast you're going to be able to push data up to any public cloud storage vendor. And I think we can all agree that bandwidth has been growing year after year. It seems like every 12 to 18 months, I reach out to Verizon. I have Fios here, and I've had it for a long time, and I ask them, what's available, and this is just consumer, broadband, and I can only assume from what I've seen that the same thing is going on with businesses as well. But I might be at 150 megabit upstream last year, and I call up and I see that they're not even offering that speed anymore to even new customers. They start at 300, and then they go up to a gigabit easily. So upstream is increasing quite a bit. Whether or not it's going to be an issue with whatever limited upstream bandwidth you have at your customers, it may or may not be an issue, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that. But I think one thing to look at is how fast is your performance locally. If you're using something like just a RAID 1 array, just mirroring, if you're using something like a RAID 5 array, a small one, maybe with 3 disks, generally speaking, your performance is going to be, with spinning disks anyway, like, Western Digital red drives for NAS, you're looking at under 200 megabytes a second. That's, a little over gigabit speeds. Most clouds can, say again, Dan?
I just wanted to throw a tip out that, so like in my MSP, what we do is we have a, usually every 6 months or 1 year, we'll go through and look at the bandwidth that we have for each of our clients, and also take a look and see what kind of changes have occurred in pricing. I tell you, it's amazing so many times that we've checked and customers can get more bandwidth, and sometimes they pay less than what they were paying, currently. And as far as the value add for our clients, that is humongous, because when you go to them and say, hey, you know what, I got a deal here with Comcast, you're going to jump up substantially in speed, and your cost is going to go down, $20, $30, $40 a month. That's huge, and they greatly appreciate that. It's just another way to take care of the client.
I find the same exact thing with consumer level broadband. I'm paying, $85 a month for 75 megabit a few years ago, and then I realized I could get, 300 megabit, upstream and downstream for $65, and it happens all the time. And it may be foreign concept to maybe some folks on the webcast from out of the country, but the way it works in the United States, especially with mobile carriers, with the phones and broadband and even cable, the contract that you sign up for is usually the price you continue to pay until you, as a proactive person or company, as the MSP managing other folks' broadband, reach out to the vendors and find out if there's better rates in terms of pricing, better speeds in terms of performance. So yeah, it's definitely a good idea to do, Dan. So how fast can you write this data up into the cloud? It's not unusual for most cloud storage vendors to be able to support 500 megabytes or even faster speeds, simultaneously. So that's pretty fast. That's like a 4 gigabit connection. And I think whether or not you're going to have that upstream is probably, you're not going to have that kind of upstream at your customers. They're going to have much more limited. But is that limited upstream performance something you really need to worry about? And I'll say in most cases, probably not. I think what you need to remember is that for those initial backups, whether it's backing up files, folders for the very first time, or backing up full system images for the very first time, you're just going to go through that full backup, generally speaking, just once. The things that are going to happen after that are with file folder, you're just backing up new and change files. There may be deduplication in there. So you may only be backing up the changes within existing files for those kinds of large files. So you're effectively doing incremental backups going forward. The other thing you're doing is doing things like compression to reduce the amount of data you're throwing up there. You're doing things like synthetic full backups with your full image backups that you're doing, where you're able to leverage, because the cloud is intelligent. It's blob storage, but there's an intelligence behind the storage. It's not like writing out data to a NAS locally. What you can do with cloud data is we can tell and the cloud to reconstruct a new full based on 90% of the information that it's already storing in the new 10% that we're sending up there. So it's rare you have to send up that, that large amount of data again. And it's not really a problem for most customers, not all, but most, because those backups can just run in the background. And even if they take, a day to complete or longer, they'll just continue to run in the background until they're done. And then from that point on, you're sort of more in an incremental type update position where the backups are going to run much more quickly. So I mentioned compression, always a good idea to put compression on. And if you have concerns about bottlenecking your upstream bandwidth, or even your network, right? Because if you're backing up even to a local disk separate from the cloud, during business hours, you can easily saturate your network. And that's not great for doing business. So a lot of our customers, a lot of MSPs we know tend to, relegate backups to at nighttime or at times where there's less activity. And that's great, but you can also look at bandwidth management, which can limit the amount of upstream bandwidth you're using. That way you leave enough upstream bandwidth. And if you're doing that, then you're slowing down your backups a little bit, but you're doing it because you need to be able to have those businesses operate normally. You can't cut off internet access solely for the backups. So that's sort of my take on it. I guess let's look over at the polls and see what folks think. Cloud performance is not fast enough. So 8% of the folks say it's not fast enough, 42% busted, and 50% say plausible. And I think that's a pretty good set of answers. So I'll show you what I think. All right, so it's a little bit of a cheat. I say it's mostly busted because we don't run into it that often as a company who's in the market of selling backup services to MSPs. But there are some customers out there that have trouble, and that's why I put a little plausible in there. Now, what I will say is something you can do is you can leverage local backups as needed, sometimes in place of the cloud backups when it's just not possible to move that data up to the cloud. So it's entirely up to you about how you want to handle it. It's more important that you're backing up. It's ideal. Ideally, you would get that data offsite as well. Everybody knows the 3-2-1 backup principle, where you keep 3 copies of the data, the live data, and 2 backup copies. And one of those backup copies is offsite. The cloud is a great place for offsite. So if you can't get it there, then local backups are good. So there's a comment there. So yeah, using NVMe for both production and backup storage, it's certainly going to cost you more money. But NVMe storage running over even PCI Express 3, but certainly the PCI Express 4 standard that's out. Most people who do any kind of gaming or just read the technology news have seen the speeds of the PS5 and the new Xbox Series X, and they're reading and writing at 4 gigabytes a second. That is, 8 times faster than the 500 megabyte read and write speeds that we've been so used to over the last say 5 to 7 years with really good SATA based SSDs. NVMEs are great. I'm on a laptop right now that's only 3 years old using an 8th gen Core i5 processor. The laptop's great, but I decided I wanted to update that internal SATA drive, which was an M2 SATA with an M2 NVMe. It cost me $59 for a Samsung Evo 970, and it's running 10 times faster on the write side and 2.5 times faster on the read side. So it's pretty incredible. NVMEs are great. NVMe SAN, if you can afford it, certainly can go a long way to undoing any of the latencies. And you can still bottleneck your network pretty quickly. You have to have a pretty fast network to support NVMe SAN on the network. But, networks are getting fast too. So thanks for that.
Excellent.
Okay, cloud. So I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I was to say, so we're going to go into our myth 3, cloud management is difficult.
Yeah, so I'm just going to come right and say, I don't think it's difficult. And I probably could end the slide there, but I will say that if you're using things like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, you're running virtual machines, say in EC2 or, in Google or, Microsoft Azure, you're managing relational databases or big data, moving data around, log files, managing your elastic storage, virtual private clouds, all that stuff, it can be really difficult to manage and certainly requires a skill set that's going to be different or in addition to the skill sets that, many of you have, creating networks with, say, Windows and Active Directory and things like that. So it's going to require that expertise. But what we're talking about here is really blob storage in the cloud. And for the purposes of cloud storage, the file management is largely going to be handled for you by the third-party products that you guys license. So if you're licensing some backup services for somebody, they are in charge of moving the data to the cloud and reading it from the cloud for the purposes of restore, and deleting objects as needed for the purposes of retention. All of that is being managed for you. On the other side of it, it's managing also the reporting for you, because you likely will be passing on these charges to your customers in some way, charging them, per gigabyte for storage, or maybe even at the terabyte level, charging them maybe differently for restores versus, backups in terms of, how much data is being restored, or you may be billing them for your time. However you're doing it, the reporting is going to be handled by whatever service you use for backup. So that's going to be handled too. So your involvement doesn't have to be very much. I mean, what you need to do with us is open the account with the cloud storage vendor and integrate the account with our service. And from that point on, we can do everything else, manage the buckets, the reading and writing of data, do all that for you. So I think data management is pretty easy. If you're talking about data movement, that's also pretty easy. We'll talk more about that in the next session, but things like lifecycle policies for those cloud storage vendors that offer different storage tiers is also automatic as well. Doesn't mean you can go into it with no cloud knowledge. You should have some cloud knowledge, and you'll probably have to decide if you're working with a vendor like us who supports multiple different public cloud storage options, which one you want to use. But the level of management is really not that high when it comes to just cloud storage. So I assume everybody's gone ahead and voted. I will look at the polls.
Yeah, so cloud management is difficult. We have 75 that voted busted, and 25%, 3 people who said it's plausible.
Okay, so if anybody thinks that cloud management is difficult as it relates to what we're talking about here, I would love to know more. So if you haven't already, dump something in the chat. I'm not watching Facebook right now, Dan, but I'm keeping an eye on the Zoom. But if anybody has any concerns about the cloud management or something that they've struggled with for real and want to share it with everybody, that would be great. I'm in the camp of 75%, where I believe it's mostly busted because, I know what we do as a company. I know what most of our competitors do, which is kind of manage the data for you. We don't want you to have to manage the data, because that would be kind of hard. So we take the legwork out of all that management for you. But go ahead, type something in the chat and we can get to it later on. Okay, so now we have the last myth, which is the cloud is too expensive or the cost too unpredictable. So this is a bigger topic. There'll be a few different slides. I'm going to go over some examples about how to mitigate some of these potential issues and try to bust this myth, but we're going to be truthful. So let's first talk about cloud storage pricing for hot storage. And when I say hot storage, I mean that storage that generally uses the term hot, that's available immediately, can be deleted whenever you want without any retention requirements from the cloud storage vendor. There may be some fees for getting the data out for reading it, but they tend to be low as compared to other storage classes that might be considered, warm or cold archive type classes that we'll talk more about. Having said that, the hot storage prices can vary quite a bit from under 0.5 cent or about 0.5 cent per gigabyte, which comes out to about $5 a terabyte, to 2.3 cents or more for, I think, one of the California data centers with Amazon, and even maybe some of the Azure and Google as well. But on average, about 2.3 cents per gigabyte. So the difference between 0.5 cent and 2.3 is almost 5x. And that's a pretty big range in prices. But the question I'll ask is, does that make a difference in your bottom line? Well, it probably will, but by how much? One thing I will say is it's very easy to mark up cloud storage for your customers, because even at the highest end in that example, you're paying 2.3 cents per gigabyte. It's very easy to sell backup storage, 8, 10, 12 cents a gigabyte. That's sometimes you'll be paying those prices for a vendor for their private cloud storage, because they're either co-locating in somebody else's data center, or they're having to run their own data center, which likely is going to be more expensive for the most part than buying storage from a company who's out there just to sell you cloud storage, where economies of scale really drive the price down considerably. So while it's a 5x range, it's very easy to mark it up. I think, though, the types of customers that you work with, whether it's not-for-profit, government, education, private business, the types of businesses you're working with, you know, medical versus mom and pop versus law firms, and the region in which you're located will largely dictate the kind of margins you're going to have to make on the services that you sell. Now, it could be that you're not making enough money on other services, and so you need to make more money on your backup service. If that's the case, you may be looking at a cloud storage vendor that has costs that are lower, so you can get to that level of margin that you need to pay your employees and retire someday and feed your dog, right? Those are real things. So you're always looking at your financials to understand how much money you need to make, what kind of margin you have on the services that you're reselling. On the other hand, maybe you're making a lot of margin on other services, and so you don't have to make quite as much on the backup services. That might allow you to use a service that maybe is a little bit more expensive, but maybe you prefer for some reason. You have a good working relationship with them, or you've used them in the past and really liked it, or they provide other features that you need, like, say, the ability to run virtual machines, and you'd rather live in a single cloud. So let's look at a few different examples of two different clouds and the margins that you could potentially make. So here's the first example, and I'm kind of using our pricing in there for the cost of the backup licenses. So you can remove that for your own analysis if you want. But in this particular example, an MSP that is managing 750 endpoints and servers pays us about $3.78 a month per license. And this is sort of taken from a real example, which is why this sort of a more why there's 157 terabytes of backup data in there rather than 150. So it's actually from a real example. So they're putting the data in.
The number you picked out.
yeah, it just wasn't a random number. It was actually a real example. So they're using Amazon S3, and they're just using Amazon S3 standard, which is their hot storage, at 2.3 cents per gigabyte. They are selling backup storage to their customers at 10 cents per gigabyte, right? They don't even sell the licenses. They just sell the storage use. Their out-of-pocket cost is that blue line down there, which is about $6,400 a month. That's for the licenses and the storage in Amazon. The revenue that they're bringing in is about $15,500 a month. So that leaves them a margin of a little over $9,000 a month in this example that they're making, right? Good margins, but they're still using a more expensive cloud storage vendor in Amazon in terms of the examples we talked about earlier. Let's say they wanted to use a less expensive version and they had more constraints on their pricing. So in this example, same 750 endpoints and servers, also the same 157 terabytes worth of data, but they're storing it in Wasabi, which charges about $6 per terabyte. So that comes out to 59/100ths of 1 cent per gigabyte. So cheaper than Amazon, certainly. They're selling backup, though, because they're a little more price conscious. They want to lower the cost for their customers a bit, or maybe they have to because of the kind of customers that they work with. They're selling, in this particular fictional example, at 8 cents rather than the previous is 10 cents. So they're paying less for the storage. They're also charging 20% less than the previous example at 8 cents a gigabyte. In this example, their out-of-pocket has come down quite a bit to only $3,700 a month. But the amount of revenue that they're bringing in, their monthly recurring revenue, is over $12,500. And that leaves a margin of $8,700. So pretty close if we compare it to the previous example. $9,200 in the previous example using Amazon versus this example where they're using Wasabi at $8,700. So, within whatever, 5, 7% of one another. So the point of showing you this is that there are ways to work the numbers with the vendors you're working with to still kind of maintain those margins that you need to be a successful MSP. And like I said earlier, a lot of that will be determined based on types of customers you work with, what industry they're in, what region you're in, and what your margins are with your other products, so you can decide what your margins need to be with the backup services.
And if I
Now, I
could
think, yeah,
throw
go ahead,
something
Dan.
out, when it comes to pricing, I mean, I think a lot of times as MSPs, when we look to pricing, we want to find, what is everybody else charging so that we can take that and replicate it in our own business. But what's critical is there really isn't a one size fits all. Even though some of these costs might be the same, the things that we have to keep in mind is what other services are we providing, that's wrapped around that backup service, because there could be a lot of cost associated with what you're putting in place, and you have to get your money for that. And also remember the value that you're providing when it comes to the backup. This is something that is basically a lifeline, right? Because if this isn't in place, it could put that company out of business. So there's the value that's being provided to that client to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we asked on the last webinar back in October whether or not MSPs are requiring backup services. I don't remember exactly what the answer was, but I will tell you from my experience, 3.5 years ago when I joined, about 80% of MSPs, about 80% of the customers that the MSP managed had backup services. That was because it wasn't a tier 1 service, even though they wanted it. A lot of customers didn't want to pay for it. That's changed quite a bit in 3.5 years. We see it at the 95% plus mark, sort of as a tier 1 service up there with RMM, remote monitoring and management, and security software. And what I find even more so now is that there are even some MSPs out there that do not want to do business with customers that absolutely refuse backup because it's a risk, right? If a customer has an issue with with lost data, whether that's malicious or accidental, and they ask the MSP, is there anything you can do? And the MSP says, no, you decline backup services. That leaves a bad taste in the mouth with the customer, even though they are ultimately the ones that made that bad decision. So what some MSPs do is they make their customers who don't want backup sign sort of like a waiver that they understand the risk. It's less of a legal thing and more of a, this is really risky what you're doing, sign that you understand that we think you're making a mistake, because they can't turn away the business because, everybody needs to eat. So it may be hard to turn away a customer that doesn't want backup services, but we definitely
really
see.
Too, I guess on that note, what you're saying is regulatory compliance, so, you might have them sign off on that, but depending on, what line of business they're in, that particular piece of paper may mean nothing when it comes to maybe them not being in compliance.
That's absolutely true. Not to mention just being sued.
Right.
I mean, the idea that you can, just remember, just because you're an MSP, making 1.5 million a year, you're a small MSP making good money for you and your team, doesn't mean that you might not be working for law firms that bring in 10 times that with the resources to make your life miserable. Right. Should they decide to do it. The last thing you want to be is in a big legal battle. So, for not providing the protection that you guaranteed you'd be providing. So yeah, exactly. I think it's always better to err on the side of caution and try to avoid it. But I understand that, in reality, that may not be possible in all cases. We totally understand that, but, just protect yourself. And even if you're just doing local backups, not ideal because you can't pass on the cloud storage costs to somebody, that may be better than doing nothing. But certainly there are lower cost cloud storage options out there. And when I talked about margin earlier, if you think you need to make 68% margin across all of your services and you're making 75% without backup and you can afford to take a lower margin, say on backup, you may be able to pass on the cloud storage costs at, close to your cost, and still make enough money to keep you within that wheelhouse of profitability without overcharging your customers. But,
Yeah.
certainly the flexibility is there. And with services like ours, you can choose any number of cloud storage vendors. So you don't have to choose a lower cost vendor and use it for everybody if there's features of the other vendors, say the big three that you need. So you have that option.
There is a question and a couple comments. Elliot Johnson mentioned it could be a requirement for cybersecurity insurance too. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yep.
And Sten, I won't try to pronounce your last name. I'm really bad with last names, even though mine's difficult. He was asking if you have any German servers or in the EU. And I guess that really depends on which, cloud provider that you're selecting. Since you do have, a few options for that.
Yeah. So when it comes to, the cloud storage vendors, all the ones that we support have EU data centers. Whether or not they have them in Germany, I would venture to guess you're probably looking at the big three. I know Wasabi and Backblaze B2 have both built European data centers. I think, I want to say that Wasabi might be in the Netherlands. I can't remember where Backblaze is. I'm pretty sure like Amazon's got one in Frankfurt, and I'm sure Microsoft Azure, as well as Google Cloud, both have data centers. All the data with our service, and I'll get to just a single slide about our service. I didn't want to make this too product focused. All the data travels between your customers' endpoints and servers and the cloud storage that you want to send it to. So if you're using a cloud storage vendor with a data center in Germany, because you're in Germany and you want the data to stay in Germany, and that's smart, then the data will travel directly between your customers and your storage. They don't have to go through any of our servers directly.
We will, for Vincent, he wants to learn more.
Okay.
And he provided his number. So Vincent, we will have a member of the MSP 360 team reach out to you. So I do have your information. Thank you.
Okay. So I think pricing, especially with hot storage, is pretty predictable. Now, there may be some data egress fees. They're generally very small for those services that charge them for the hot data. There are other storage classes with some vendors. I call them warm storage. You can think of that. I'll use the Amazon example since they may be most familiar to everybody. Things like intelligent tiering or infrequently IA, infrequent access, S3 infrequent access. And then the cold archive tier is the most common one that most of you know is probably S3 Glacier, S3 Glacier Deep Archive, but all the big three have different tiers. The idea behind those tiers is that I think of it as a give and take. You are giving less money for the storage, meaning you're paying less per gigabyte, but you are taking the risk of additional charges as they relate to data egress and not meeting minimum retention requirements. So the nice thing about hot storage is you're charged based on your average data use over the course of the month. If you add retention requirements to that, if you're working with a service that's got a retention requirement of 30 days, 90 days, something like that, then you're required to keep all of your objects up there 90 days, or you pay for the privilege of deleting them. So if you have a 1 gigabyte file that you leave up there for 60 days and you have a 90-day retention and you delete it after 60 days, which of course you can do, there's an early delete fee for that last month for that 1 gigabyte. So you would pay the 1 gigabyte rate for that file that no longer exists. There's almost always going to be data retention requirements for warm and cold storage, and it's something to keep in mind. How do you make that money back if you're using those services? Well, one way is to charge your customers for restores. Maybe you'll give them a certain amount of restores, but restoring could be time consuming for the MSP. So maybe you'll charge them hourly rates for restores that are over a certain amount other than simple file restores. Maybe you're going to charge them for how much data they're restoring. Maybe you'll give them a little bit of data to restore with the account every month, and over that you'll charge them. It's entirely up to you. My recommendations around whether or not you should be using archive tiers is the following. Use archive, these cold tiers, if you have a need to do data archiving. as opposed to just using them because they're inexpensive. They can be very time consuming to get the data out. Many of the services will require hours just to prep the data and get it staged, ready for you to restore. And restoring the data can be quite expensive depending on the service you're using, even though the monthly per gigabyte charge is extremely inexpensive. So you'll have to weigh that. If you're working with businesses, say law firms that need to keep data for 7 years for their customers, and you want to move everything from hot storage to warm storage after 30 days to cold storage after 90 days, and then leave it there for 7 years because you don't think you're going to need to restore, but you want to pay the least amount for it over that time, that's a great way to do that. And you can actually use things like life cycle policies, which are available with the cloud storage vendors that provide these multiple tiers. The life cycle policies will intelligently move the data for you based on your requirements. So you could say something like back up to S3 standard, which is their hot storage, after 30 days, because you feel like if you're going to need to restore something, it's probably going to be within the 30 days, move it to S3 and frequent access, and then leave it there for another 60. And then after another 60 days, move it to Glacier. And then maybe even after, say, another 180 days, move it to Glacier Deep Archive, which is even cheaper. There's also options out there like, from Amazon for their intelligent tiering, which will automatically move data between S3 standard and infrequent access for you based on data access patterns. So that's also good to do. And all of these vendors, no matter who they are, all provide calculators that you can use to understand your charges, whether it's for API charges or reading data or data egress from regular storage and additional data egress charges from the warm and cold tiers. You can certainly look at that and consider it. My recommendation usually around the archive tiers is don't use them unless you really need data archiving. You're not going to be happy with many of the services in terms of restore speeds, getting the data ready, and certainly the charges that you might be dealing with for getting data out should you need to get a lot of data out of those archive tiers. So use them for archiving. Don't use them strictly because they're less expensive.
David, I'm throwing together one additional survey question right now.
Okay.
I'm really curious to know if people are doing data archiving, and or if it's they have whatever their normal policy is. It just is that, and it drops off. So go ahead and throw that out there, and I'll share that in just 1 second here.
Okay, and if you haven't already voted, vote. If you changed your mind and you can't change your mind, I don't know how the polling works, then go ahead. I'd say right now we have I think it reset.
Let me try to bring that back here.
It may have reset, but we can just ask everybody to vote again on the fourth one if we can't bring it back. Plus, I remember what it was. I think they're revoting. Go ahead, revote on 4 and 5. So is the cloud too expensive? I'll tell you what it was before. I realized everybody's voting again. There was a small number who say it was confirmed that they believe that it is too expensive, unpredictable. And that may be the case for your business. And if that's the reality of it, that's the reality of it. Nobody's here to change your mind. Busted, there were more people that said it was busted, but some people said it was plausible, that could be too expensive. I say there are ways to mitigate the unpredictability, and there are ways to mitigate your expenses by different costs, cloud storage vendors, and different data tiering within some of the cloud storage vendors that can help lower your costs. What I will say is that when you compare those numbers, and that's not something I'm doing here in the presentation, with what it might cost to run your own data center, you might find that the costs are far less. Now, I do work with MSPs who work with their own data centers. They make them available to the software, usually using VPNs with their customers, or using S3 compatible software like Minio that can expose your data center storage as S3 compatible storage for the purposes of using it with like our service. But they're leaving these data centers in place only because they've been built already. They've already invested the cost and they're making money on them. So dismantling them doesn't seem like a good idea for them. For those of you who are considering building a data center versus using the cloud, I think you'll find the cloud as unpredictable as it may seem at times. I think you'll find the expenses more predictable and very easy to pass on to your customers while still generating profit. So I see now that I don't know if as many people voted this second round, but most people are in the busted area. And I will say that I think it's busted. Now, I might be biased. I'm in the business of selling backup services, and I get that. So your opinion is going to be more important than mine. All right, so 8 minutes left. Let me just tell you in a minute what we do at MSP 360 if you're not familiar with us. You may know us from our old name, Cloudberry. We went through a rebranding a little more than a year ago. We design backup services for MSPs, and that's what we've been in the business of doing for the last decade or so. We wanted to make them affordable, powerful, and easy to manage. The way we did that was allowing you to back up to any of the public cloud storage vendors you see. The list of them over there on the right: Backblaze B2, Wasabi, Amazon S3, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure, as well as local backups and S3 compatible. We do support those. So if you're in a region where your local cloud storage vendor is not on that list, but they provide an S3 compatible API, and many cloud storage vendors do. Wasabi does. Backblaze now offers it. Amazon, of course, offers it since they designed the API and open sourced it. We can integrate with those cloud storage vendors, even if they're not explicitly on the list. So we allow you to rebrand the product so it has your name on it if you want. You don't have to advertise MSP 360. We back up just about everything. All of your customers' endpoints and servers, Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. We can back up Microsoft SQL Server as well as Microsoft Exchange, and we have support for Office 365 and Google G Suite if you're using those hosted applications. We do full file folder as well as image-based backup. Image-based backups currently on Windows only. So we can restore entire operating systems to using bare metal restore, restoring to the cloud, or restoring to virtual. I should mention we support virtual machines as well. We can do host level backups of VMware and Hyper-V. And we back up so we can restore, right? That's what you're backing up for. So if you need to restore, we want to make that flexible. You can do file folder restores from any kind of backup, as well as I already mentioned, use bare metal or virtual or cloud-based restores for virtual machines. Everything's centrally administered in a thin client management console with two-factor authentication. You can lock down the agents to prevent ransomware from being able to hook into the agent APIs or command line, so they can be locked out completely. So those agents are just running backups. And we provide those flexible cloud storage options, so you can tier your cloud storage services, your backup services, to customers of any size and need. So where to go next? Well, I'm going to show you a video in just a second with the winner for, is it today's day 15 giveaway, which we happen to be sponsoring. This is just a coincidence, I think. We're going to be giving away everything MSP is going to be giving away an Apple 4K Apple TV.
Apple TV, yeah.
And the winner will be announced at the end of the video when I play it. For all of members, if you want to sign up for our service, we'll give you $100 in free credit. You don't need a credit card to sign up. If you want a trial, just sign up. Takes all of 5 seconds. Request a personalized demo. I do them every Thursday at noon. You can find the link on the Managed Backup main page of our website, but I do a demo every week. But get a personalized demo for one of our solution architects. They love doing them. They'd be happy to show you the service, demo any features you need, as well as show you backing up to any cloud storage vendor that you happen to be interested in. We do have a managed remote desktop product. I just want to mention that. So if you're doing remote work, which many of us are, especially during the pandemic, maybe more so than normal, and I know many of us can't wait to get back on site. We support Mac and Windows. We can do chat and voice and file transfers, and it's fully secure end-to-end encryption. So that's fully managed. We do have a few sites that might be interested for you to go to. We have something called MSP University, which is just a bunch of useful information that we put together for MSPs about being an MSP and selling and marketing and positioning products and all that good stuff, as well as all our previous webinars we've done. If you want to see ones we've done on pricing and bundling and anything else, you want to watch the one that we did with Dan back in October, that's probably up there also on Dan's site as well. So let me go to the next slide, click play on it, and then I'll let the, here we go. See who the winner is.
Premier Network, Justin Gordon. Angela Chang won the Apple TV sponsored by MSP 360. Thank you, David, and the team at MSP 360 for that. And if we are giving away every single day from December 1st through the 25th. We have a prize, I should say a gift from Santa. So if you want to join the nice list, I'm going to throw a link in here in chat. And I also throw it on Facebook, so you can register right there to win any additional prizes between now and December 25th.
We have like 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any final questions before we sign off? We don't want to rush you off. Is there anything you wanted to ask us? Could be product focused or just general cloud storage, of which I may or may not know the answer, but I'd be happy to pretend I do if I don't. Anyone? Anybody? Bueller? No. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope everybody has a nice holiday. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah if you're celebrating Hanukkah now or any other holidays. We look forward to doing this with you, Dan, again next year. And everybody stay safe. Enjoy the holiday. And I will probably be digging a lot of snow tomorrow and probably enjoying it. It'll be good to get outside.
Enjoy that snow. And also one thing to remember for everybody is if you are a member of the Everything MSP group, Artem from MSP 360 does an awesome job at posting a lot of materials that you can use, a lot of forms. So, you know, that's pretty solid stuff. There's like onboarding, offboarding.
Oh, yeah, that's an MSP. I can pop over there real quick if you want to see it.
Sure, sure.
So if you go to, can I get there? Resources, and you go to MSP University. And then you click on, I don't know, probably MSP Business or just all guides. You'll see a whole list of guides that are there. I think this is what you're referring to, Dan.
Yeah.
There'll be onboarding, offboarding, how to sell, marketing, how to create documentation. This is just stuff that we wanted to get back to the community. So it's all there for you to look at, download, complain about if you don't like it. Doesn't matter. We love the engagement. Doesn't matter what it is.
Well,
and then of course, if you want to sign up for the trial, just you can hit the landing page, click the free trial, even request a demo if you need, right from that page by requesting a demo. You want to read more about the product, the features, just come to MSP Backup and you can read more about everything that we have and all the good stuff we do and videos and all sorts of amazing stuff.
Exactly. Well, David,
I never get tired of talking about. Really,
it's good stuff. Yeah, and you learn something new every time, right? You know, it's.
I'm just amazed about how fast and how big managed services is. I had no idea 4 years ago getting into this that the market was going to be growing. Like it's like I was in enterprise software for about a decade before joining MSP 360, and I saw, you know, all the mergers and acquisitions, all the venture capital and private equity going in and out, and the managed services is just like that.
Just continuing to grow month after month. So it's a good thing for all of us.
Yep.
So with that being said, everybody have a great day. David, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
And we will see you all soon, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care.